Pubzer here once again, and today I got a fantastic explosive concoction of destruction build for you. The skill in question does fire damage by default, but if we have flask charges available on our topaz, sapphire, or ruby flask, it will take said charges from each available flask per attack, and based on which flask charge it takes the charge from, we get added lightning damage, added cold damage, or critical strike multiplier. That is why on this build I focused on investing as much as I could into all that is flask. Be it gaining additional flask charges, flask charge use reduction, flask duration, or flask effect. A lot of this comes from the passive tree, but I do have jewels and the Tides of Time belt that helps big time. In any case, you may have noticed throughout the video that two things are happening. Number one, sometimes I do run out of the Dying Sun Ruby flask, and number two, flasks change from bossing to mapping. So let me address each one. The Dying Sun running out, this only happens on prolonged boss fights, and unless you are fighting a fire-based boss, you will not have any issues, especially if you have your fire resistance capped naturally. I personally have never had an issue, but again, I am not trying to kill Shaper or Exarch over and over. What also helps is running Arctic armor because of the less damage taken from fire hits, as well as being immune to ignite thanks to my flask explicit modifier. The big thing about running out of Dying Sun Ruby flask is losing out on 2 additional projectiles, which means I do less damage on a single target. This is because explosive concoction is one of the few skills left in the game that still shotguns. If your AoE is big enough and you are close enough to your target, all of your projectiles will hit. The second thing to address is the flasks changing. In the gear section, I'll go over this in more detail, but I have 2 setups. One for fast mapping in T17s, just kidding, T16s, and the other for slower, more cautious mapping in T17s. For T16s, I use a Quicksilver flask because I want to go fast. Furthermore, I switch out the Arctic armor for Herald of Ice to get those nice explosions going when clearing mobs. I typically run 8 mod corrupted maps and rarely die or have any issues, as long as I pay attention to the mods on the map. There are of course mods to avoid, such as Elemental Reflect, but most mods are fine, including no regen. On the T17s, I switch out the Quicksilver for the Iron Flask. Both those flasks have gain 3 charges when hit by an enemy, and I crafted used when charges reach full. This means that when I am constantly getting hit, they are constantly getting replenished and used. In those T17 maps, I want my ward up to be 100% of the time, especially on bosses or against a big pack of monsters, and it works like a charm. Combining this with Flask Mastery, gain 4% of life on using a flask enables me to not need a life flask. Thanks to my other flask explicit mods, which grant me poison and bleed immunity, I am generally not worried about dot damage. More on defenses, currently I have 80 block and spell block, and about 85 spell suppression, both of which can be pushed much further. I also have 83 all res, I run Arctic armor, flesh and stone, and have endurance charges. So overall, fairly tanky. If I don't run incredibly rippy T17 mods, I can do them deathless no problem. Matter of fact, I leveled from level 92 to 95 exclusively on T17s with just a few deaths. If you're looking at the POB, you may have noticed that I am not running Trinity Support Gem because unfortunately, it's too inconsistent. The fire damage from our attacks is the highest damage by far, and so I wasn't able to get 50 resonance on all 3 elemental damage types. The only way I could see it maybe working is to drop some other runes perhaps, or maybe get level 3 or 4 Enlighten with additional mana reservation nodes on the tree and run Wrath to try to scale lightning damage to be more in line with the fire damage, and then Trinity Support Gem should work. It is a huge damage boost, but for me personally, I think the damage is fine. Again, for the nth time, I'm not uber bossing or running super crazy content. But that's the beauty of this build. It's versatile in that you can go more defensive or more offensive if you want. I'll briefly talk about gear choices right now. Anyway, back in 3.23, I made a Pathfinder version of this build utilizing the Crest of the Desire helm on one link with permanent replica Rumi's flask. With the introduction of the Swollen Shield and new and easier ways to get block, I chose to use a Scion for more damage and utility. Initially I was using the Assassin Ascendancy, but after switching up my gear and using the Relicish Boots, I chose to go for Slayer for more damage and AoE. I also use Forbidden Jewels in order to get the Pathfinder Ascendancy. Wanting to utilize Ward on this character, I got Ward on my gloves and helm. It's amazing how cheap this fantastic gear is this league thanks to the boats. Thank you so much. I also wanted to scale damage and Ward at the same time, and the best way I thought was possible was through the chest piece Skin of the Loyal. This was by far the most expensive item on this build, and it set me back about 10 divines. Overall, this build ran me about 30 divines. I haven't checked the prices in the past week, so could be more, could be less. The belt, 3 utility flasks gained, Tides of Time. The Onslaught ring was self-crafted. Yes, I slammed the region myself. The other one just filled in the necessary stats I needed. Ashes of the Stars, I think this is the best in slot because of the quality it gives to the skill gem, making it so that the skill uses less flask charges per attack. Here are my flasks that are static: Dying Sun, Sapphire Flask, and Diamond Flask. And here are the flasks that I alternate: the Iron Flask and the Quicksilver Flask. Because I didn't get the same mods on the flasks, I do also alternate the Topaz Flask, but it's not necessary if you're not lazy rolling the flasks. Don't be like me. Lastly, when I run Arctic Armor, I don't need the freeze immunity, so I switch from Brine King to Lunaris. Something else to consider: if you're having a tough time against rares or bosses, you could try socketing Frostbomb into the Swollen Shield, maybe even perhaps Wave of Conviction for the exposure. I get mine via a Cluster Jewel notable. However, you could also get Fire, Cold, and Lightning exposure as an implicit on your gloves. That's basically it. If you have any questions, let me know. Oh, and I did link the 3.23 Pathfinder build guide down below as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time with another video. Bye.